And she emerged from the fire. But what's really fascinating is she acknowledged them. They suddenly saw this incredibly tall, again, 40 feet maybe, screaming figure, this bright figure, like really massive, standing on the hill.
You're listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network, and now it's time for the Paranormal Peep Show.
Hi, welcome to the Paranormal Peep Show on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. And joining me is regular host and guest speaker is Ben Emlyn Jones. How are you, Ben?
Hi, Neil. I'm very well, thank you. It's good to be back on the show for yet another interesting interview and discussion.
Yeah, we haven't had you on for a little while because you've been away in America and doing all sorts of other conferences and things like that. Is it good to be back in the saddle again, as they say?
It is kind of, yeah. I've been traveling a lot and going to a lot of events. I've as many as I can, really. And I went to the a movie premiere as well, Capel Green. That's finally emerged. And so yeah, and I'm it's the 60th anniversary of the Warminster thing coming up. So yeah, this calendar is quite packed at the moment.
Yeah, I've got my ticket for that, so I'll probably see you there.
Hey, great.
Yeah, so look out for a video on that at some point in the future on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. So we'll jump straight to our guest. And the last time I was just talking to him before we started to hit the record button, I think we had Andy Thomas, our guest, about 5 years ago. Do you agree with that, Andy, roughly on our show?
Well, medieval times now. It seems so long ago, doesn't it? But it's nice to be back anyway.
Thank you for joining us once again. So we're on more positive terms joining us because the last time I think we spoke, it was just as COVID was hitting our shores and we were discussing what's COVID-19 and what does it all mean and things like that. And we've now kind of waded through all the things that came with that, all the unexpected things that came with that, as well as the expected things. And you've written a new book, haven't you? So it's called Strange. Is that right?
It is, and it is a bit strange, which is the idea. The strangest thing of all about it, though, being that in the end, when you look around you and you look at all the paranormal things going on, as you all know, the strange isn't really that strange at all. So there is a kind of an irony in the name there because it's about people's experiences of the paranormal and the strange that I've been collecting for a long while now, through all the thousands of people I've met over the years who are completely ordinary, normal folk with no interest at all in the paranormal, who had paranormal experiences. And because, I stand up on stages and blab about it, they feel safe to share their stories with me. So I thought, you know what, this needs recording and analyzed and put into a kind of a usable form. And what you realize is there's many forms of the paranormal, and yet they all kind of join up in the middle. And the book, I hope, tells a story. There's a narrative in there. And by the end, you realize, hang on, all these disparate things aren't disparate at all. They're all linked. The world is strange. The universe is leaky, which is, of course, very exciting.
So, before you actually got to this book, you've written loads of other books, and my understanding is that you worked in an office for a while, then you tried your luck being a keyboard player in bands and things, and I know you still play the keyboard to this day. But somewhere in that mix, you started to get involved with crop circles, and was that always a fascination for you, or was someone asking you to say, "Hey, do you fancy coming to a crop circle one day?" And that's where it started.
Yeah, so I mean, crop circles, that, as some people will know, that's where it began for me. And that's what some people still know me as, although I've been studying loads of things over the years. But yeah, back in 1991, I was in the West Country on holiday, and there were loads of crop circles. And I had kind of heard about them and I was faintly curious about them, but didn't really think that much about them until I got down there where there were so many of them. And, every horizon you looked at, there seemed to be another crop formation. And I just something went ding in the pit of my stomach that I really needed to know more. And that's when I sort of began this insane search to try to get to the bottom of what that was all about. But then, of course, the more you get into that, and I joined my own research team down here in Sussex and began to meet more and more people, you find there's loads of people that are investigating different strands, not only of crop circles, but of the paranormal as a whole. And of course, that then leads you into people looking into UFOs and then cover ups and conspiracies. And, before I knew it, that took my life over, really. And by some strange, circuitous route, I found myself being asked to give lectures about it and then write books. And here I am. And so, I tour around trying to tell people, hey, this is still going on and weird stuff's happening. And maybe we should all talk about it. And luckily, there are quite a lot of people who still will talk about it for all the skepticism that, we always have to deal with.
Mm.
Yeah, definitely.
So, go on, Ben.
I
Yeah.
just add you also you are part of the organising for the Glastonbury Symposium as well. That's quite something
Indeed.
because it's quite an event, the Glastonbury Symposium, isn't it?
So, I mean, yeah, we just had the latest one a couple of weeks ago, and it's 35 years old. It's done very well. I didn't begin it, I should tell you. I came in about 3 years later, and it's managed to survive. And I think the reason it's survived is that it's always grown, it's always evolved. We haven't stayed the same. It began looking at crop circles and UFOs, but as we all realize, okay, this is all connected with loads of other stuff. It gradually embraced that, and now we call it the Expand Your Horizons event because it is about making people look at the world around them with new eyes. So we've managed to survive, and people still come, which is ever so nice. And in the end, we're trying to get conversations going that are just not considered respectable in the mainstream world, which is ever so annoying. But equally, gives you a mission. It gives you a cause.
Does it's really? Perhaps because you have such a wide variety of interests, and there's what is contributes to the success. I couldn't go this year, unfortunately. I've been to two of them over the years, and I've had a great time on both occasions. And there's UFOs there. There's like a deep geopolitics. Crane was always like a big part and everything. He did his deep geopolitics. God bless him. I miss him. And I think this is really what I think contributes to why it's such a good event. I do recommend going there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it covers a broad spectrum, but hopefully it all connects in the middle, and it's all about just being able to have conversations that it's not so easy to have outside of that safe environment. But equally, then you meet like-minded people there, you exist together, you share conversations and stories, and of course that is where networks grow. And yeah, I'm pleased to say that the Glastonbury Symposium has, I think, brought many people together over the years, which is fantastic.
Mm.
It's a good example of people uniting together under one roof of things that they're prepared to be in the open and talk to each other about, and they feel comfortable about it. And I'm sure that I've had the same experiences as you have, Andy, writing books on the paranormal, where people will come up to you at the end of a talk and will privately tell you their strange, bizarre
Oh, Andy's Neil has gone frozen. Oh dear.
He has frozen.
paranormal and pass them that ball of information to be filed away somewhere because they can't sort of just ignore it. And the Glastonbury Symposium and other places like Changing Times, which you organise as well, and other sorts of places that Ben's done, Dreaming Saucers and the High Wycombe Paranormal Meetup Group, which I used to run. It's a great place for people of like minds to gather and kind of discuss these things. And that's where these little nuggets of information sometimes pop up, which has helped you greatly in your latest book, of course, because you've actually very cleverly listed your sources of information of where they've come to, whether they've come through communications, i.e. email, or conversations, or any other form of things like that. And so it's interesting to see how these things have come through to you. And what I was going to ask you, was there any kind of area of the paranormal that you was always a bit suspicious that maybe couldn't be true, but you've since changed your mind about?
No, not really. I mean, I've always been open-minded. I mean, I was brought up as a Roman Catholic, so you've got to be open-minded, haven't you? If you can believe that, you'll be able to look at anything. But I think, although that's not my pathway now, I don't regret having that background because it opens you up to the mysterious, to the numinous. And so, no, I mean, I've always said I will never ridicule anyone, no matter how seemingly bizarre their interests are. And then the same with people that believe in conspiracy theories. If you have a theory that sounds bizarre, I'll hear it out. If you've got some evidence and there's a conversation worth having, I'm never going to laugh at anyone because things that, people do laugh at do sometimes turn out to be valid, or at least there's something there worth talking about. And that's what I'm always saying. Let's talk about it. Let's have the conversation. Don't just brush it under the carpet. And I mean, I'm really lucky because I get to speak mostly to completely normal everyday groups, community groups. That's just the way it's gone. Now, I give talks about other things too, history, folklore, and whatever. And you just find, therefore, people there have never had that opportunity before to share with somebody that is going to be open to them. And it is amazing, like you say, Neil, what they come out with, because suddenly they're in a safe space to do so. Now, and the conversation will often begin with one of two things. One is, well, I've never told anybody this before, but, and then they tell you some incredible story. And the other is, well, I'm very skeptical about these things, but, and then they tell you something where clearly they're not skeptical at all. Some incredible paranormal event happened to them. But, recording that and making sort of some examination of what this means for reality. It's in a way, it's the
And we take a break here on the Paranormal Peep Show to allow Andy Chaplin, who is waiting in the sidelines, to join us to carry on interviewing Andy Thomas. Right, and as you can see or hear, we now have Andy Chaplin join us. He had trouble joining us via the Teams, which we are now using in replacement of Skype, but it's never been a happy bunny so far, and we don't think it will be for the rest of our days. So we're going to try and make sure that we don't get our Andys confused, because we got two Andys in the mix now. So Andy Thomas has agreed to be called Andy T, and Andy Chaplin will just be still called Andy. Is that all right? Is that all clear, everyone?
That makes sense. We have something to distinguish the two.
Okay. So just to remind listeners, Andy T has written a book called Strange, paranormal stories from various people he's met or dialogued with over the years. And now I started to read the book a few days ago, Andy T, and one of the stories that struck me as very interesting was concerning a guy that was walking his dog in Hong Kong. And he was walking up a hill from where he lived. And I believe, if I recall rightly, some war battle maybe from the Second World War occurred in that vicinity. And he saw this luminous figure, and the dog ran away, and he went right up close to it. So can you take us through that story? It's very, very interesting.
Definitely. Well, we can even name the person this happened to. So some of these stories in the book are anonymous, but this was a man called Mike Waller, who I've known Mike for quite some years now. Very respectable, upright, standing member of society, and he worked in Hong Kong for many years. And he was working for the British government there, and would therefore go out, walking on the islands with his dog, with the unusual name of Queen. So Queen's running up the hill, and suddenly, as dogs will do when the paranormal's around, just suddenly reacted really strongly and was barking and going mad. And when Mike looked at what the dog was looking at, there was this sort of shimmering, sort of looked like a figure, humanoid figure there. But as you say, what was really fascinating was, and Mike, he's very open-minded to this kind of thing. He wanted to get closer. He wanted to look at it. And the nearer he got, he realized that instead of it being one block of white shape, actually it was made up of lots of like mini globules of light, spheres of light, making up the whole of this humanoid figure, which is something that I've not heard before, but he was very clear about it. What's fascinating was he was struck by this incredible sense of sadness about it. It's like this figure was trying to reach out in some way to him, but, it was seen that they were fearful, the dog was going mad. And he wasn't quite sure what to do. Part of him thought he should try and reach out to it, but then on the other hand, he thought, well, I don't know what this is going to do. It's not interfered with me yet, but it might do if I try to intervene. So, yes, he then thought, well, I want to remember where the spot was. And he marked where he was standing very close now to this apparition with stones. And then the apparition faded away. And he did go back there. He didn't see it again, but he then found out that there had indeed been a battle on those very slopes in World War II, presumably between the Americans and Japanese, and the British, I imagine, were involved too. And we'll never know for sure, but the impression he got was this was somebody who died in this battle. And, in the classic ghost sort of way that you often get, as the book records, when something's a traumatic death, and often when it's a quick death as well, it's like the spirit, whatever you want to call it, doesn't know where it is. It doesn't know what's happened, and that's often when it will leave a ghost that will forever seem to appear in that place. Now, we only know of that one sighting. It may be others had also seen it, or maybe it was a one-off. But this creature, this humanoid, we assume what's a person, it left its mark there. It felt like it was trying to reach out in some way. And and it also, what that story also identifies is something that often gets overlooked with ghost stories, is that there is an emotional value attached to it. So Mike felt very sad. He felt very melancholic afterwards about this. It wasn't frightening as such, as more, he felt a longing to want to help this being, whatever it was. And that's something you hear in a number of ghost stories.
Neil and Ben, have you ever heard of an apparition being made up of lots of different orbs at all? It sounds almost like when you get those Chinese displays of loads of drones together and they make like one big object, but I've never heard it that normal kind of.
Yeah, it's a strange one, isn't it?
I've not heard of that. No, I've not heard of that at all. It's interesting that Andy T, you say that Mike had an open mind to this sort of thing, and indeed, some witnesses to these phenomena are people with a pre-existing interest. However, I think you already stated earlier, a lot of them are just ordinary people who don't have a pre-existing interest. Sometimes they develop one afterwards as a result of their experience, whether it's UFO, cryptozoology, ghost, or whatever it might be. And that to me lends, I think that lends a lot of credibility to it, because if these things were figments of our imagination, you wouldn't get that. It would be something exclusively for pre-existing believers.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then one of the things that really annoys me, and by the way, the book Strange opens with a bit of a salvo against the skeptics. Gets that out of the way, and then we can get on. Then we get on looking at really interesting evidence, not trying to counter them all the time. But it does need saying, that they tend to just say, "Well, you wanted that to happen, so you imagined it. You wanted to meet your recently deceased relatives, so you imagined that you spoke to them." That is so effing condescending. It's so patronizing, right? That's not what's happening to most people. Most people do not expect this. They have no wish to see a ghost at all. It happens to them out of the blue, and as you said there, Ben, often that's the moment where they cross over and realize, hang on, all these things I've been hearing about over the years, maybe it's true after all, because they then have their own experience of it. So yeah, I think it is a very profound thing to meet the paranormal like that, and I think it's personal experience that does open people up. Although, as I mentioned earlier, some people will still say, "Well, I saw this ghost," or whatever, and they'll describe it in great detail, but then they'll say at the end, "Oh, but I'm still skeptical." And I never quite know what that means, and it's almost like they feel they have to say that in case anybody around them's gonna make fun of them. So that's another interesting phenomenon.
I met a guy years ago who works as a security guard, and he had told me that when he lived on one of these West Indian islands, I think it's St. Lucia. He said that he was coming home from the bar one night with his mate. So you think, oh yeah, he's had a few, but it was fact these, you talk about this, are they group hallucinations or possibly not? And both him and his friend, as they walked up the hill, they came round the hill, and on the church roof, he said he saw a woman sitting on the church roof. And I said, what? What's a woman doing sitting on the church roof? And he says, she was no ordinary woman. She was as white as the fridge freezer, because where we were working, we were actually in the staff canteen at the time, and there was the fridge freezer. And he used that as his kind of description tool. And he said, it was as white as the fridge freezer, but she was at least 50 foot tall. And, my jaw dropped. And I said, oh, my God. And he said, yeah, she was sitting on the roof of this church with her feet either side of it. He couldn't believe it, so he checked with his friend, who by now was hiding in front behind a gravestone. And he verified with him. He says, can you see what I can see? And he said, yes, I can. So this security guard, Owen, he said he picked up a stone and he threw it, and it went straight through this 50-foot woman. And I said, well, what happened then? He said, she stepped off this church, like as if it was a doll's house that she was sitting on, started to walk towards them as a 50-foot tall woman. And I always think it's not a good idea to throw stones at 50 women. But she shrunk in size. And as she shrank in size, she just dissipated and dematerialized into the ground. But the interesting thing, after all that, he said, I still don't believe in ghosts and ghoulies and things that go bump in the night. I still don't believe they exist. And I said, well, what about that then? He says, I don't know. It's almost he was in denial because he didn't want to accept that reality that he had come across with his friend, which almost proved it to him because apparently it was two of them.
Yeah. Two people can't hallucinate the same things, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
You wouldn't have thought. Again, that is something that, the book records, is that often, as you know, it's more than one person that has this experience. So for this theory, it's all in one person's mind. That is plainly just untrue, because there's a lot of group sightings. And it's very talking about people who see the paranormal but are still skeptical. I mean, somebody that pops up through the narrative of the book is my friend Phil, the guitarist, as I call him. And I worked with Phil for many years, 34 years. We gigged together. And he, on the surface, he'll tell you he's a complete skeptic, but then he will regale you with all these strange things that have happened to him. And one interesting thing is, talking about big figures, so he and a group of friends, and they were in their late teens probably, were walking home one night past these kind of very black downlands, not far from where I was born, actually, Lewis and East Sussex. They suddenly saw this incredibly tall, again, 40 feet maybe, screaming figure, this bright figure, like really massive, standing on the hill, screaming at the sky with this horrible howling. They were all so frightened by it, and they all saw it, that they ran, and they noticed all the cattle in the fields nearby were running away from it as well. They were going completely mental. The cattle were falling over, trying to get away from it, which was terrifying. But of course, they all knew they were all seeing the same thing. Even the cattle were. So they knew they weren't just hallucinating it. And, it's things like that you hear, and you never really get to make any sense of them, other than I've learned since that other people have seen the same apparition in that same area. So this is the thing. It's like the more people talk about it, the more you're going to get to hear the truth. Whereas Phil will say, well, I don't know. There must be some explanation, but he can't tell you what it is. And that's often the case with, the everyday paranormal people. They find a way to rationalize it. But really, in the end, you've got to begin to embrace, the reality possibly of other realms to come to terms with it. I don't think everything does have a mundane explanation.
Do you think that people genuinely don't believe, or that they don't want to because it might unopen a big can of worms that they don't want to kind of have a look at themselves?
Yeah, I think it is often that. I think there's a fear of the unknown and a fear of then having to embrace a universe that you can't make any sense of. Now, we're used to talking about that. A lot of people aren't. It's all to them. It's A to B. It's black, it's white. And of course it isn't. But facing that, it is something people don't want to go to. And I think we're seeing that really now, very interestingly, with the whole world of UFO stroke UAP research, where it's edging ever more closely to more and more surprisingly high level whistleblowers saying, hey, this is real. And now you're getting a kind of a kickback against that, of people just don't want it to be real. that, the most amazing, stunning bit of footage ever, somebody will still say it's balloons or whatever, because it's like they cannot face that. They know that the day that lid comes off, everything changes. And I mean, I think there's official factions that don't want that to happen because they're trying to protect themselves, or who knows what they're trying to do. I think, though, there is also a strong cultural urge to not acknowledge it, because then you've got to realize the world you're living in is frightening. Same with belief in conspiracy theories. That's why some people will poo-poo conspiracy theories, because they don't want them to be true. Because the day you say they are, they don't feel safe in the world they're living in. And yeah, I do think that is a big part of it.
What's the difference between a conspiracy theory and fact? About 6 months per year.
One of these that's frustrating. Yeah.
And on that note, Andy T, this huge asteroid that they thought was an asteroid, some of the biggest scientific minds are now actually saying, well, actually, there's about 0.5% this is a natural formation and could be a huge UFO heading to the UK. And there's now debate, not so much whether it's a UFO or whether it's a natural asteroid, but whether it's come here for good reasons or to annihilate us.
I'm very glad you brought this up, because I was actually going to ask Andy T about that. But the F3I Atlas, yeah.
Yeah, Atlas, yeah. So, well, isn't it interesting? And what's most interesting is how we all react to it. Now, there's been the occasional other body. What was it? I can't remember its name. There was that long thing, the solar system. Thank you. A few years ago, and it was behaving oddly, and then it seemed to go on its way. So this, if it is a comet, it's behaving very oddly. I mean, it's an interstellar object. It seems to have come from a long, long way away. It's not something that's generally orbiting around our solar system from what they're telling us. I mean, who knows? But yeah, I mean, the way it's behaving, it's doing things that normal comets don't do. And the speed and the trajectory, that seems to be heading roughly our way. I mean, it doesn't seem to be on a collision course today, but who knows? Yeah, it has made some people, even, like you say, surprisingly high level people are saying, well, this is actually quite odd. So one of the reasons some people think there is a UFO cover up is that they think we'll be just too terrified to know what's coming if they told us the truth. So, now there's theories, is this the thing coming to visit us? Is it going to park itself in orbit and that's the big unveiling, or is it going to hit us and wipe us all out because somebody out there's decided we're too dangerous? Either way, the authorities probably think the day we know that, A, they lose all control, and B, a lot of people will go a bit mad, which they probably will. So yeah, isn't it? It's very interesting.
It is. You see exactly how people would. I mean, I'd be thrilled to bits. But yeah, there's a lot of really sensationalist headlines which you see everywhere, which is like alien invasion in 6 months and things like this. Is all nonsense. It's all based on the work of Professor Avi Loeb, who's the scientist who actually originally discovered Oumuamua. And his blog is actually fascinating, and the various papers he's written. And he's very, very senior. He's an Israeli, but he's actually head of the American Astronomical Society, and he actually is in Harvard University. I can't remember the title of his position. He's basically head of astronomy and astrophysics, the most senior as you can get. So this isn't some guy with a tinfoil hat, definitely not. But he's been treated. I mean, for example, he did an interview with Jill Tarter, who's someone who works for SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. I mean, she swore at him on this public forum, and I thought there's been a real emotional reaction to what he said. And I'm sure there are plenty of scientists out there who secretly agree with him, but they don't want the kind of aggro he's had to put up with.
No. Well, and that's something that, I've written about before in my other book, my previous book, The New Heretics. When an official mainstream scientist says one thing that is off topic, they are branded maverick, and that's it. All their scientific credentials are pushed aside, and clearly they're mad and wrong, and that happens all the time, which of course creates this horrible constant polarization where you want people in the official scientific world to get on board and look at the paranormal or whatever it may be. And of course, they're fearful to do so because they know the day they do that, their careers are over. And there's another good example of that in a moment. Now, Ben, you think good on names. Can't remember her name, but there's an astronomer now. There's another astronomer working with her who's been looking at old plates.
Beatrice Villarreal. That's her, right. Swedish lady, yeah.
Well done.
What's such a geek?
Because I can't remember her name, so that's fantastic. So yes, so she's now looking at these plates taken before any known space travel here, and there's different dots moving around, and they're clearly not stars, they're not asteroids. What are they? And she's saying, I don't think we can ignore this now. And she's trying at the moment to get a peer review paper published, although I think she's beginning to think it won't be, because again, it just doesn't speak the orthodoxy, because basically it says, hey, there was something flying around the Earth even back then when there wasn't supposed to be. So what are they? And that's an astronomer, but even just daring to raise that, you just get slammed down, and it's such a shame.
And I've noticed that she's actually published the draft. I mean, I think she's certainly not naive, because I think she realizes exactly how difficult this is going to be for her. So she actually put the draft on a PDF and put it in a public domain. I've read it. I've read the whole thing. A lot of it's very technical. I don't understand every word, but she clearly has gone to great troubles to eliminate other possibilities. You know, the possibility of natural objects in the sky, of blemishes on the film, other kinds of effects, and it really, if this doesn't get published, it'll obviously be for an ideological reason and not because it's unscientific.
Yeah, well, it's a bit like Richard Tarnas, who wrote this incredible book about sort of Western history and the Western mind and all of that. And then one day he decided he was going to write a book about astrology and why it works. And of course, that was the end of his career. So the minute you cross out of that very narrow band, the scientism says is real, that's the reality, unfortunately. But maybe she will just decide, look, this is so important to me. I don't care. I've got to go public with this. And the fact that you're saying that she's put this PDF out there already, I mean, in a way, she's kind of condemned herself, I don't doubt, because so that will now be embraced by mad people like us. And of course, that would be the end of her scientific career. But what a silly world we live in.
I know.
But it has to be.
Well,
like that.
it's a fait accompli because she's already in trouble for joining Dennis Osperia, the man who discovered the Baltic Sea anomaly, this strange object on the seabed. That he's with the company that actually found it. Yeah, so she's actually working with him now. So.
Yes. If this object does turn out to be, in quotes, alien, that raises some interesting questions, because we need to find out the speed of it, and then given the speed, how long it would take, or how long this object would have taken to get here from, let's say, the nearest inhabitable planet, whatever that might be, or star or edge of the solar system. You know, how long would it have taken for this object to get here? And if it's something like light years, equating even into thousands of years or millions of years, is that feasible, or is it somehow jumping through wormholes or something like that? So the kind of like the logical, kind of like the nuts and bolts of it, I'm quite interested in as well.
Currently, all the current theories are based on the premise that this is a natural object, and it's been on the same trajectory for billions of years out in space before it stumbled onto the solar system by accident. And they're saying it actually emerged from Sagittarius, in the direction of Sagittarius, which is basically where the galactic core is. And so it probably come from, they reckon, from that region. Although as this is all dependent, Neil, Andy, as you said, it's all dependent on that fact. If that fact is not true, so for example, if it changes course again, then we've got to assume that maybe it changed course before. Well, one important point to raise here is that it's pretty obvious you can't cover things like this up. Sure, if you get a crash retrieval like Roswell, it's quite comparatively very easy to suppress, because it's a strictly local affair. You just seal off the area, you get rid of the decisive evidence, and then you just put out a weather balloon story or something like that. This is something above our heads that all the telescopes in the world can see. And there's thousands, millions of amateurs, there's thousands of professional astronomers. So it's not actually possible to suppress this. So what happened? I don't know it.
If they're saying this is coming from Sagittarius and probably a natural object, why are there so many people saying that it's not a natural object, and they're saying that there's a 0.5% chance of it being a natural object?
Avi Loeb, actually, well, but I'll let Andy T's our guest, but Avi Loeb on his blog has a full explanation about exactly why he says it's quite likely this is non-natural.
I mean, I think in the end, the only problem we have is that we have heard claims like this before. You might remember in the 90s, was it Comet Hale-Bopp? And everybody said there's an alien presence and something's following it. But wasn't that the one that triggered this mass suicide? So, But the danger is, yes, that's it, that people, they project a lot onto these, and then, of course, it goes again and nothing happens. And, of course, that doesn't look very good then when people put these ideas forward. Again, though, you have to just be open-minded. Like you say, Ben, at the end of the day, you can't cover this up. If that suddenly starts to maneuver in ways that no known comet does, they're not going to be able to hide that. So that's going to be really interesting to see what happens.
Right. I think we need to take a break here, guys, because we're running up to near the hour. So we'll take a break and we'll be back with part 2 with Andy Thomas on the Paranormal Peep Show on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Stay with us.
Today's the best day of my life. Woohoo! Listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network.
Join Andy and Neil every month on the Paranormal Peep Show, part of the Paranormal UK Radio Network, for fun, frolics, and lots of information about weird stuff, UFOs, ghosts, and things that go bump in the night and everything associated with them. Fascinating guests, fascinating talk, fascinating information.
Welcome back to the Paranormal Peep Show on the Paranormal UK Radio Network with myself, Neil Ward, Ben Emling-Jones, Andy Chaplin, and our guest, Andy Thomas. Now, before we get to Andy Thomas, Andy Chaplin wants to talk about AstraZeneca. So go ahead, Andy.
So we all love a good conspiracy theory, don't we, Neil? The whole COVID era we've got to be careful what we say, because we're now living under communist censorship under Labour, the Marxist Communist Labour Party, who want to censor everything. So we've got to be a little bit careful about what we say so we don't get the Stasi knocking at the door. But I came across something very disturbing over the weekend about the name AstraZeneca. Now, AstraZeneca, people think that the name sounds so futuristic and modern. You think of like the cosmos and astrology and kind of like reaching for the stars. AstraZeneca, they're going to fix everything, right? Okay, this is a thing that people can do at home, and you can kind of like go along with this at home to test it. Because when I first saw this, you got to be wary of these things, and you got to be objective and skeptical and think, okay, is this just a load of old bollocks, or is this true? And you got to do this with all sources of information. I want people to go on to Google Translate, and I want you to go from Latin to English, okay? And then I want you to break down the name AstraZeneca into this: A stra Z nika. A stra Z nika. So AstraZeneca broken down. Guess what it comes out as?
What's in Latin?
A road to death.
Road to death. Oh my
A
God.
road to death. I'm going to put it in chat. You can have a look. And I've tested this. So it's not a case of you see an image and you believe it and then you test it. Oh, it's a load of old rubbish. No. You literally go into Google Translate from Latin to English. AstraZeneca, a road to death.
Wow.
They're actually telling you what they're doing.
They do though, don't they? I mean, this is it in a way. This doesn't surprise me, Andy, because
Yeah,
the Illuminati always do this.
they've got to tell you what they're doing. If they're going to screw you over or they're going to genocide you, they've got to tell you what they're doing. Andy T, what's your comment on this?
Oh, I have no idea. I mean, isn't it fun though? You start looking at the origins of a lot of industrial names, and I'm sure we would get the real story coming out. Like, I think you're right. I think, look, embedded symbolism is only fun if you can actually let people know that it is embedded symbolism. If it's too clever, they don't get any satisfaction out of that. So, what can we say? I mean, it would be worth asking them one day what they have to say about that.
It's actually to do with their belief system. I mean, for people who've been inside the sort of like black magic areas, I mean, Mark Passio, for example, is a very good source for this. They said the reason they have to tell you, as Andy said, they have to tell you in advance what they're doing. They have, not directly, but they hint at it and they leave clues. And it's in their belief system, you see, it's like a karmic green light. If we then don't react.
I think their belief system is, if they tell you, then technically you've given consent if you don't object to it. I think that's
Exactly.
where they're coming from.
Even though obviously it's not something signed in triplicate, which is very comprehensive. It's a hint, it's a clue. It's like you get these strange symbols in movies, like Neo's passport expired on 9/11, things like that. It's them saying, this is what we're going to do. And if you don't notice these things and don't say anything, don't object, and don't stop us, it's your fault.
Is this why they put everything in Latin in medical terms so that they can sweep it under the carpet a little bit?
Well, I don't know about medical terms, but certainly the Bible was originally in Latin, and there was objections in turning it into English for that very reason. They wanted it to be in control of, the people in the flocks that have their connection with God. They didn't want it in English for the masses to learn.
Yeah, I mean, people think the King James Bible was the first English Bible. No, there was a guy called Wesley, I think, John Wesley, somebody Wesley, here in Oxford, where I live. 400 years earlier, he translated the Bible into English. He published his own translation. You know what happened to him? It's that he was lynched by a gang of priests.
Yeah. Yeah, lots of people were burnt at the stake and things for translating into English. An irony of do no harm and all that kind of stuff. It's just makes a complete fallacy of the whole thing. Anyway, getting back to Andy Thomas's book, the fantastic new arrival on the paranormal bookshelves called Strange. We were talking about ghosts in part one, and I still haven't kind of completely left that area, although I know there's other areas to go into within the book itself. One of the other intriguing ghost stories, Andy T, that I read anyway, was the lady that materialized out of some people's chimney, and they came out the fireplace. This lady, can you tell us about that? That's really fascinating, that one.
I can. What's good about that is, again, that is another example of more than one person witnessing the same thing. So they were an elderly couple, but they had their marbles, and I was chatting to them. And then in the way of it, they're very casual about, we had a ghost walk out of our fireplace one day. Like that's the most normal thing in the world. So they lived in a nice old country English house, and they had a big fireplace, and they would sit on a, cold afternoon with their tea, the side of the fire, all cozy. And then one day while they were doing that, suddenly out of the fire, this intensity began, and it literally took on the full form of just this lady in what they described as period dress. Now, that can mean anything, but some kind of historical costume she was wearing. And she emerged from the fire. But what's really fascinating is she acknowledged them. She stopped, and it's like she was seeing them. They were seeing her, like sitting there, like with their tea. And she just looked at them, kind of unconcerned, and then walked on and just vanished into the wall opposite. Now, the fascinating thing was to talk with them, the two witnesses at the same time, and you realize they're just telling you something that happened one afternoon. You know what I mean? And yes, they were disturbed is the wrong word, but it unsettled them. Yes, but it got them onto doing what some people do after that, is to think, why was she coming out of the fireplace? And they looked back at the earlier plans of the house and discovered that where a wall and a fireplace was eventually put in, that was a corridor. So that would have been a way through the house that people would have walked on. So did that lady, once upon a time, in whatever time period it was, just suddenly find herself standing in a fire? And two people saying, what does she see? That's what I find really fascinating. Did she see them as the ghosts? She seemed too perturbed if she did. And then maybe she just thought, like a lot of us do, well, there's got to be some explanation, and then just carried on. And then there's a few stories like that in the book where people see the ghost, and the ghost is looking at them like it's seeing something weird. So what is a ghost? We might be the ghosts to them. And if this is just some tube in time and space that suddenly connects two different time space points together, we're all ghosts to somebody somewhere.
That's really fascinating, because when I read that, it stirred in my mind a memory of reading in the book the Vertical Plane, which is about the Doddleston messages. And Ben, you have an interest in this area as well. And I have briefly alluded to the Doddleston messages in previous Paranormal Peep Show episodes. But just to briefly go over it, it's about this couple in the 1980s, mid-1980s, Ken Webster and his girlfriend Debbie, and he was a teacher, and he kind of borrowed computers, early computers, BBC Acorn computers from the school he was working at, and he was bringing home different computers over a period of a year. But they mysteriously found these messages written in early modern English, appearing to come from a guy about 400 years early, who was using some form of communication and communicating through their computer, which obviously in those days wasn't connected to any internet because we didn't know what the internet was then, but somehow it was receiving messages. And in those days, those computers, you just typed in like a Word document and saved it to a floppy disk. But there'd be extra files appearing on the computer with these messages. Now, the guy who claimed that he was communicating through said that he was from the year 1538 or something like that. And he said that someone stepped out of his chimney in the Middle Ages with a box of lights, as he described it, because he had no word for a computer. He just called it a box of lights and instructed him on how to use it. Now, I don't think for one moment we imagine a medieval guy tapping away on a QWERTY keyboard back in the 1500s. From what he described in his messages, he just seemed to speak, and the messages formed in the air and somehow appeared in 1984. But the original person that came from a future beyond us apparently brought this box of lights back to him in the 1500s. So again, he stepped out of a fireplace, and I wonder if fireplaces are portals or can be used as portals for spirits emerging from one portal or dimension to another. Any thoughts?
Oh, I mean, obviously, fire. I mean, it's sacred. It's, there's so many rituals around it. Whether fire in its own right acts as a portal, I don't know. But that's interesting, isn't it? To make that connection there. What I have discovered though is that anything can be a portal. Obviously, haunted houses are effectively somewhere where time and space has got very leaky. Stuff comes and goes, and not always the same stuff. I mean, if you look at Skinwalker Ranch, for instance, where, if we believe even a third of what they claim comes and goes there, just seems to be this place that attracts beings of different kinds. And you hear that in houses. So there might be a recurring ghost, for instance, but then people will start to see strange creatures there, or, different people will see different things. And it's like, it's a weak point in time and space. But equally, it can be individuals through the portals, where they can leave a house where they thought it was haunted, go to a completely new house, and the ghost will follow them. And there's a couple of cases of that in the book, and they see the same ghost and think, "Oh no, I thought I got rid of it. Here it is again," because they are the portal rather than the place. And there's a number of cases where you will get a very haunted house with a lot of bad activity or just strange activity going on. That family moves out, a new family comes in, and nothing happens.
That was
Because it's like they're just tuned in differently for whatever reason. So I think there are different things that can be portals. Fire as a portal in its own right. That's an interesting idea. Maybe. I'm sure some ancient people would tell you so.
That was the case with the Enfield haunting. Apparently, when they changed houses, where the new people moved in, they got nothing, but where the girls went to and the mum went to, it carried on. I don't know if it's the same ghost, Bill, or whether it was different ghosts. But as you say, I think the girl was the centre of attention, and I think she was the portal to it happening.
Yeah, poltergeists tend to hang around particular people rather than particular locations. Yeah, but what's interesting about the story is that on one level it could be like a stone tape type ghost, which it tends to like just walk old paths, and if buildings change and walls are built and some are knocked down, it'll still continue to walk the way it did before. In other words, that's why they go through walls and things like that. The thing about the stone tape ghosts is they're literally just like an image. They're an image like the Roman soldiers the guy saw in the cellar, a very famous case from York. They were just images. They were just like a three-dimensional projection, a hologram. They didn't notice the man there. They didn't notice anything in their surroundings. Yet this person did. I mean, this particular image actually did acknowledge the people who were there, which indicates that's not a stone tape ghost, even though it shares some of the properties of the stone tape ghosts.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? I mean, I come to the conclusion in the book that there are many different causes of ghosts. I think there are time slips, like you say, just something replaying over and over again. I think there are spirits that have actually consciousness. I think there's also other entities that we call ghosts, but I think just exist on other levels of reality that manage to find a way through here. And some of them are quite scary, others seem perfectly benevolent. So, yeah, I think there's we say a ghost, but actually there's multi levels to what a ghost is, and I certainly don't think people are always seeing the same cause, and I think very often you can get different things coming together. So yeah, I mean, when we say ghosts, and I try to separate this out in the book, there's many different expressions of that, and they're not all scary either. And one thing I really wanted to get away from was to not just have it as another spooky book. Yeah, some of it is unsettling, it's true, but a lot of it's beautiful. People that have met relatives or had conversations or friends who've just died, only the person seeing them didn't know they'd just died. It's like they were coming to say goodbye. Some of it's really lovely. Some of it's funny. So, we've got stuck in the groove of, oh, it's all dark, spooky, ghosty stuff. And that's not really the story. I think more often than not, it's more mundane than that, or just easier than that. And that's something I really wanted to reflect in the book.
It's you know that some of these phenomena that we talk about are alarming and they're worrying and frightening, and sometimes they can be harmful, and we know that. But you know what? If someone, I don't know how you guys feel about this. I predict you'll agree with me. If someone said, "Well, would you like to live in a world where this sort of weird stuff never happened and it just didn't exist?" Because we could live in a world like that. Indeed, the skeptics do believe that's the world we live in. And
It'd be boring though, wouldn't it?
yeah, if someone gave you an opportunity, would you rather live in this world where this stuff does happen, warts and all, or would you live in a world where it doesn't? I would choose the former every time.
But that comes back to what we were saying earlier, wasn't it? Which is a lot of people don't want to believe that that is the world they live in. That is why they deny. There's people in my family who I think really know there is something to it, but they don't really want to hear that. They don't want to hear my weird stuff because it unsettles them too much to think that it could be real. So I think that comes into it quite a lot.
Indeed, yeah. And I'm sorry to butt back in again. I know the other guys want to say something, but that ties in so much to when we did our little obituary to James Randi, and when he died, we did two videos about it, and we said that this is, in some cases it could be subconscious in which we fool ourselves. In the case of Randy and several other people, I believe they are actually literally lying because they're scared of what would happen to people if too many people start believing this stuff. So in other words, it's kind of almost a parallel to the UFO cover-up. They'll say, well, we have to keep these things silenced because there'll be social chaos or the oil companies will fall, etc., etc.
Yeah. Did anybody ever see the ghost of James Randi?
That'd be interesting.
Well, I wasn't sure if he's going to come back and say, oh,
What I think about ghosts is the fact that, you've got like the different classifications of them. You've got ones that interact with people that seem to be the relatives of people, the spirits of departed souls, if you like. And then you've got these ones that just don't interact with anyone. They're just going about their daily tasks, repeating actions, and are cited over centuries. And then you've got other ones that seem to sort of like come and go with some sort of I don't know, they're stuck in some area and they don't know anyone, but they're sort of stuck. But they're perceived in different ways. The man in Hong Kong saw this glowing kind of figure of light. Other people see these ghosts very, very clearly, except from the knees down, they're missing. And other people see them as glowing kind of orbs or something. And yet we're all classifying them as ghosts. But I think it's maybe the analogy that I can best give is that if we think of images that we today access and we accept that they're all on different things. So, for instance, some years ago, we would start off video recording onto tape, and we'd have VHS tapes that we'd put in our VHS machines, and you'd have to adjust the tracking because you get a cracky little bit of picture at the bottom, and you get this dropout and tape crease, and so the image would distort a little bit until it's stabilized. And then later on we started to get DVDs where you could pause images or you could zoom in on images. And these days you've got over the internet, you've got these things called GIFs, which is like graphic short animations of people, short clips that replay and replay and replay. And I think that, if you took someone from the Middle Ages, they would all say that they are spirits, but they're all kind of doing different things. But it's because we understand the media that's presenting those images. We understand TV broadcasts, we understand DVDs and VHS tapes and pixels on a computer. We can interpret them in our own age of technology. And so I think that what's happening is with these ghosts, we're trying to interpret them and we're labeling all as ghosts, but in fact, they're all kind of different, what I would call different media ghosts coming through on the different kind of structures of reality. You talk about, the leaks in reality. There was a spirit guide called Seth who used to channel through Jane Roberts. And he said a similar thing. He never said they were leaks, but he said all systems are not closed. So in one reality parked next to another reality, next to another reality, you can go through them. That there's holes between them, if you like. And so therefore, this is why we do get leaks in the machine as such, where we're seeing things that shouldn't be in our reality, and vice versa. From what he said, we are sometimes seen as ghosts on other level of reality. Yet here we are as flesh and blood creatures, but we're appearing as spirits on some other level of reality. It
Yeah.
could be the same for people like having out of body experiences, which you also talk about in your book.
Yeah, I mean, that's as the book goes on, what I try very much to do is to say, right, there's this phenomenon, there's that, there's this, there's this. Look underneath it, and you find they're all linked. And out of body experiences are happening, for instance, to so many people who got no idea even what that is till it happens to them. And it's really common. I mean, I'd say it's about 1 in 10 people have had something like that. Now, I know there are certain medical causes for certain experiences, but some of this you just know that can't explain it. Consciousness clearly can be projected. We know about various remote viewing programs that the US military is doing, and that we are not just the flesh and blood. We have some separate existence, but equally, that's where it all links up with all these other realms. I mean, how often will a scientist tell you that reality is multidimensional? Well, okay, what's living there then? It is just layers, and sometimes they merge, and what we call ghosts, aliens sometimes, and a lot of UFO researchers now think consciousness plays a much bigger role there than just nuts and bolts and little grey organic beings and angels even, which gets a bit of an exploration without a religious connotation as such, because in the end, they're entities that are coming and going. And I think they are all linked. And when you start to see the bigger picture, and, hopefully the book leads you to that as you go through it, you get a whole new view of what reality is. And you realize, okay, it isn't the A to B mundanity that perhaps we thought. We didn't think it was. But most people out there, that is what they're taught. And if you're taught that over and over again, you're not going to ever sort of come into contact with it unless something happens to you or somebody you know and you trust and love says it happened to them. And that's often when the facade begins to crumble away.
Andy, if we take the idea that sometimes we don't know who the ghost is, so people, let's say in the modern times now, come across and they see a ghost like in a vintage outfit, whether it's Victorian, Middle Ages, whatever, and we don't know whether we're seeing the ghost or they're seeing us as ghosts. We're seeing them in vintage clothing. Presumably, they'll be seeing us in our modern clothing, but to us, it would be kind of current clothing. That would kind of indicate that if that was the case, shouldn't there be cases where we're the ghosts of people in the future? And shouldn't there be people seeing people in futuristic clothing and they're looking back on us in the same way that we're looking back at medieval people and thinking that we've got old fashioned clothing? So the question is, have you encountered that at all? Or could it be the case that when people are seeing aliens, they're actually seeing some version of the future?
I was just going to say that because I mean, a lot of people now think that maybe not all, but some UFO encounters and the beings that they meet are actually us from the future, or at least beings from the future. So that may well be already happening. I mean, you raise a really good point there, though, as well, which is that why aren't ghosts naked? And a number of people have raised it, and I talk about this in the book. Why is it that they tend to, even though they're in the spirit world, they retain the clothes that they had from those times? And actually, I think there's a reason for that. And it kind of goes back a bit to stone tape theory that whereas I think we psychically imprint on things, anybody can. You can see dowsers do this. A dowser can create an energy point that other people that never saw them do it can come in and find. It's like intent imprinting of the mind creates something that bonds together, and people will often bond closely with things, and ghosts are often coming back attached. And again, we're back to that idea of portals, either to a place that was once special to them or an object. And sometimes objects can often be linked to a ghost, even though the object's then been moved out of its original place. And there's an example in the book of the bed where the boy's grandfather died, and he died in that bed, and they thought, well, we don't want to waste the bed, and they put the bed into the boy's room as an extra bed for his friends to lie in. And he was so terrified when just a few days later he actually saw the image of his dead grandfather lying on the bed. And then his mother came in and she screamed because she saw exactly the same thing. So, in other words, whether that was just a visual apparition, some kind of auric residue, or an actual spirit, we don't know. But it was attached to that bed, and they moved it out, and that form was not seen in there again. So these are interesting things. So I think the spirits and the clothes, I'm imagining, is because in the end we imprint on those clothes. So you see not just the spirit. In a time slip scenario, of course, well, you're just seeing through time. But if it is a conscious spirit that seems to acknowledge people, still you see the clothes. And I think it's because there's an attachment there. So I think that says a lot about the psychic world and the material world, that in the end, they bond together in some way.
There's something else I could kind of add to that. In the Matrix movie, Morpheus talks about the residual self, in terms of kind of like a holographic projection of the residual self. In essence, when people see kind of like spirit orbs, I believe that to be the essence of the soul, because in our human form, with two eyes, two ears, mouth, fingers, everything that we've got biologically is because we need it physically on this physical earth. However, when your soul goes over to the spirit realm, whatever that may be, you don't really need eyes or hair or ears or fingers or fingernails or toes or heart or lungs. You don't need those things. Those are only needed for living on planet Earth. So I think when a soul is projecting themselves for earthly humans to see in a ghost form, they are projecting a version of their former selves in a holographic reality, so that the person viewing it has some kind of reference to what they're seeing. Because if they show themselves in their purest form, I think it literally would just be orbs. And I think maybe some orbs don't project the full human form because either they can't be bothered, or they don't want to, or they're just quite happy being in their orb form without necessarily a holographic manifestation. I don't know if you
Well, I mean, what's interesting there is, I mean, that, and I think you're probably right on some occasions, that makes the presumption that the spirit, the apparition, is projecting that form for us. Whereas it might well be that we shape that energy into the form we recognize, and that it's coming from that way. And there is a lot of evidence of that. And some people have found also with UFOs, and some people think they are actually beings in their own right, that it will shape into what people expect to see, and not everybody in the same place sees the same thing. So, yeah, I think we also might be shaping it. And if there is, say, a spirit and that orb or whatever, it's the purest form. But you create what you know, what you feel on some psychic level, that represented originally to you, rather than them just, projecting it. So, yeah, it's really the whole area is so fascinating. And that's why I think this is just such a good thing to talk about. And people don't talk about it. And another thing that's kind of related to that is, when you look at the amount of ghosts that get seen, the vast majority of them are either from people who recently passed or Victorian dressed ghosts.
Yeah.
We all know people, they don't know what a time period is 9 times out of 10. So that could mean anything over a period of several hundred years. But it is true. Although you do get them, you get far less, say, Roman ghosts. There are some Roman stories in the book, but they're much less, far less Saxons or tribal people from around the world. It's funny, it tends to be the fact that a ghost, in terms of a spirit, it kind of runs out of energy in the end. And again, with stone tape theory, maybe like the electromagnetism, whatever it is that maintains the apparition to us, it kind of winds down after a while. But somebody or something, or the disturbance of something, can re-energize the battery power. and suddenly it comes back for a brief while. But it is interesting. Ghosts do fade out, it would seem, in due course.
I wonder why this atrophy exists, because it is a valid question. It comes from skeptics. Sometimes skeptics do have a good point. Why are there no caveman ghosts? Why are there no Bronze Age ghosts? And the atrophy, the energetic atrophy, is the only explanation I can think of.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and on the subject of time travel, it's interesting of humans from the future. I mean, this is it is a fashionable idea in ufology right now. There are some problems with it though. So, for example, when it comes to time travel, it is actually possible to travel into the future. Under Einstein's laws of special relativity, there's even a man who's done it. A guy called Valery Polyakov. Valery Polyakov, he was actually an astronaut on the Mir space station. He spent 13 months, and he actually traveled 1.7 milliseconds into the future because he was going around the Earth at 17,000 miles an hour all that time. You go fast, you'll go into the future. If you have faster spacecraft, you'll go further into the future. The problem is when it comes to going back to the past. The problem is that's actually not really possible, because where are you actually going to? And once you get into the realms of going to the past, you get time travel paradoxes and things like that. So you see, these humans from the future can't. Where are they coming from? In other words, they're coming from a place that doesn't exist, because we could easily become like extinct or something, and we would never become these things from the future. Indeed, we could even do something while they're visiting us that makes us become extinct, and therefore they wouldn't exist. So you get this paradox, you get this loop of paradox. So how could they exist if we stop them existing? Things like that. There's many other examples I could give.
One way around that is to say that every time, just say you can travel in time. Let's say you can. Every time you do it, you're actually creating yet another parallel reality. You're basically splitting off into multi-dimension. And a number of scientists have discussed that, which means that there is no one direction in time. Yes, those beings might have come from one of those paths, but the very act of moving back, they've come out of that path. They've created a whole new one. They probably can never go back to that original path. But I mean, obviously, this is all speculation. But
It would explain so much.
it will make sense. That will make more sense how it does. Rather than literally being travel, well, it was a time travel. That's kind of loaded. Do you know what I mean? I think if you just say that the universe is torn to bits, basically, and is full of holes and things don't run from A to B, you go, all right, that makes so much sense. We're trying to make sense of it again in that A to B. They came from there to here. I don't think it works like that. I think it is so tangled and multi-layered and Mobius strip-like. I just think that as yet, we can't fully comprehend it. So it isn't going to fully make sense to us. But maybe to somebody out there somewhere, it does. But I don't think we're at that level of understanding yet.
Yeah, that would actually solve a lot of those paradoxes if we accept it's like it's more parallel universe than literal time travel. Yeah.
I mean, even a load of channels, including Bashar, there's probably loads of others as well, talk about many different, almost infinite kind of dimensions and realities and things going on all at the same time. And our consciousnesses are really kind of just choosing which reality we wish to experience. There's quite a few.
This would fit, for example, in fiction, for example, the Back to the Future movie, where the Marty McFly character, he goes back into the past when his parents are children, and it's an interesting idea. But then he never does go back to the future. He can't go back to the future. What he does is he goes to a completely different world where his father is because he takes on the school bully when he's a kid, he's a stronger, more confident man, so he's more successful. He was a struggling writer, but in this new world, he's a successful novelist.
I mean, if we're going to go to the Back to the Future films, we could be here all day. Things that don't make the slightest sense. It doesn't really add up. I tell you one book that really explains it well, though, how it could work. That it is, and I don't generally like sequels written by other people, but okay. Stephen Baxter, well-known sci-fi writer, wrote a sequel to H.G. Wells's The Time Machine, and it's called The Time Ships. And I really recommend it. It's brilliant, and I actually think it's better than the original book. And it gets into this every time you shift in time, you're just creating a whole new history, basically. And they realize they can't actually ever get back to the first point they started from. because the minute you do that, you've already changed it, and it explores it really well. Back to the Future, I love the films. I really think they're fantastic, but actually, there's so many things that even in the time paradox world really make no sense at all. But hey, isn't it fun?
What a ship. I mean, H.G. Wells himself was it was a very sinister figure, I think, but he was still very clever. And so I'd be interested. I did read The Time Machine. It's quite short kind of novella, so I'd be interested to read the
Read Baxter's sequel. It's really good.
We got 15 minutes before we close the show, so it would be nice if we talked a little bit about the UFOs side of things that you also cover in your book. And I presume that you've interviewed lots of people, or they quietly had a word in your ear and said, "I've seen something or met something," and get standing cases of UFOs or even beings that might be associated with them for you, Andy.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the points the book is making is, I'm not saying these are the biggest, best, most famous cases. I'm putting that all aside, saying this is what's happening to normal people all the time. And in a way, it's that mundane repetition of, I saw this, that happened to me, that becomes important. As the book goes on, you realize, okay, shit, this means something. It doesn't have to be a big famous case. This is happening all the time somewhere to somebody. And I've met two people that said, for instance, they witnessed UFOs coming up from beneath the sea. And one was, and this was while it was still being active, was at Dungeness Nuclear Power Station. And they said they were all aware that something was out there, basically monitoring what they were doing. They were all ordered not to say anything about it, of course. And funnily enough, I then completely independently met somebody else whose husband had, in that same area around Kent, had also witnessed things coming up from beneath the sea. And of course, now that is now a big topic of conversations. USOs, stuff's going in and out of the sea as much as it is going up into outer space. So you got things like that going on. And then you've got classic cases of dancing objects and things doing things that, as far as we know, nobody ever could have done when this happened. Some of these go back several decades. Some are more contemporary. But again, I've also met people who were present in the military, in air traffic control rooms, who've all said they were all present. It's like the classic Close Encounters of the Third Kind scene where the guys reporting the UFO and you see them all around the radar images and all that. And then they say, "Do you want to officially report that?" And he goes silent and says, "No, I don't wish to report a UFO." So I've heard that from real life, but with another twist, which is often they did report them, that pilots would say, "Yes, I've seen this incredible thing." And they were then all taken aside and said, "You will never speak to anyone about this. This does not go in any record book. It's not recorded. This didn't happen, did it?" And I've heard that from many people. So intimidation and cover up, as we know, but it's interesting to hear it firsthand, goes back a long way. And then, of course, as people retire and life goes on, they think, "Hey, what's the problem? I'm going to tell people." But I think there's a lot more of that than we have known for a very long time. And it's now blindingly obvious there's a huge cover up, whatever the truth of the whole UAP thing is. But yeah, so many people just see them in the balls of light. Now, as you mentioned earlier with orbs, are they spirits? Is it alien? What is it? And I've seen the balls of light myself over crop circles. And you just go, it's all related somewhere down the line. And when you look at the work of people like Nick Hayes, who gave a really interesting talk at the Glastonbury Symposium a few weeks ago, biological UFOs, some of this stuff up there, I think they are life forms in their own right. They're not just a craft housing something else. There's stuff coming and going all the time that we're trying to label with these really easy labels. I don't think it's like that. A lot of people now have been looking at infrared images and discovering there's stuff up there all the time, basically, and it's shifting and it's moving. And I think if we actually could see what was above our heads all the time, yeah, I think half the population probably would go completely mental. But
And
there it is.
have you heard of the history of night vision?
I've heard of it. I'm no expert on it.
Oh, this is mental. I swear you could look into this. So night vision has been kind of like they started actually looking at it in the early 1900s, believe it or not. Even I think during the First World War. But certainly in the Second World War, night vision was a thing. The Germans had it. I believe the Allies had it as well. Huge, great, massive scopes on rifles. Here's where it gets paranormal. In the Vietnam War, they were experimenting, the US side were experimenting with different types of night vision and the colors used and how they were used. So they were looking at night vision in red, in green, and blue, and yellow. They kind of settled on green. Here's the weird thing: helicopter gunship pilots were using red night vision, and they were seeing, and I'm not making this up, demons with big flapping flying wings flying around everywhere, and they were unloading, and they weren't high, they weren't on LSD or cocaine or heroin or anything like that, because drugs were quite prolific in the Vietnam War. But and you could look this one up, and they were unloading kind of miniguns on things that weren't there. They could see it with the red night vision, nobody else could see it. So they switched to green, which is what we use at the moment, and they found that the demons disappeared, the flying demons disappeared, but what took their place was weird UFO type things in the sky, kind of like little objects that shouldn't be there. And they kind of like came to the conclusion that actually the UFOs and the little lights in the sky are less of a problem than big flapping demons with red. Because the thing is, with night vision, you would think that red would be the logical color to use, and the reason for that is that in the army, and I was in cadets many years ago, you would use a red torch because it's less harsh on your night vision. It preserves your night vision. So if you see a flash of red light, or someone shines a red light, your eyes can adjust very quickly and easily to get back into kind of like the darkness. Whereas any other color, someone flashes a white or yellow or green or a blue light in your eyes, it's dazzling, and it's going to take your pupils a lot longer to kind of adjust to the darkness, whereas red doesn't do it. It's about preserving your night vision. So night vision scopes should be red, but they're not, they're green, and this is the reason.
Well, yes, you don't want too many people seeing demons, do you? So I can see why they're switched.
Yeah, it's there's articles on it. I mean, it sounds bizarre, and anyone can have a look into it. There's articles on it, and this is what they found. They found what they described as demons flying around. It's just bizarre.
That's very odd. I mean, I hadn't heard that one before. And I mean, it's almost as if there's some kind of color filter on our perception where we see different things depending on what color we're seeing them in. Because obviously the sensor itself is using the same wavelengths, regardless of whether it's green or red in the display. So it's almost as if the different colors we look at them through make us see different elements of reality. It's very interesting, that.
It reminds me a little bit of seances where in physical manifestations of seances, for instance, Helen Duncan, and also with William Crooks and the medium who was, I forget the young medium he was working with, but she was producing the materializations of Katie King. In all those instances, they would illuminate the seance room with an infrared lamp in safety reasons, because apparently if you did it in normal daylight, these spirits would automatically dematerialize from their ectoplasmic forms, and the ectoplasm would go rushing back into the medium and harm them, or in some cases it's really been quite life-threatening to them.
In Helen's case, I mean, she died eventually from burns.
Yeah. So the infrared light was there to enable the spirits to safely walk around the room and be seen by people in the rooms as well. So it's interesting that particular wavelength of light was allowable to see these spirits, but it makes you wonder with these night visions and things, other spectral creatures and things seem to be habiting other realities or something. You just need to see it in the right wavelength, literally.
This is it. It could be a frequency thing, because I'm not an expert on how night vision works, but from what I understand, it uses radiation and photons, and it takes light and photons within the system, kind of amplify it, and that's why you see it. But it could be the difference between red, green, blue could be using different frequencies. I've actually found, as we were talking, a number of different articles on it, and I've dropped it in chat so you can have a look at it. And I would ask people to use their own discernment is probably the right word in looking at these things, but it is bizarre. It's just bizarre.
Okay, I think we're coming to the end of the Paranormal Peep Show now. So, Andy Thomas, thank you very much for joining us. Any final words on the paranormal that you could sum up, maybe in a paragraph or something, especially about your book, of course.
Look, I mean, it's happening. And I think we need to kind of all grow up now, not us, but the world, and just accept there is such a thing as the paranormal. It's not all easily explicable. So let's hear people's stories and let's encourage people to speak out, because I think when we do that, we're going to get a whole other version of the world that we just don't hear about enough. So listen, if you know all about this kind of stuff, you're still going to find the book Strange really helpful, because 95% of it is brand new material, and it's then woven in with the bigger picture. And if you're slightly new to it, I mean, this is a good starting point to get those conversations going. I mean, if you want to find out about me and what I do, have a look at my website, which is truthagenda.org. And there's a whole page there about Strange and where you can find it and what's in the book. And you'll find the book easily enough in all the usual places where you can buy books.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for joining. It's been a very fascinating discussion of all things UFOs, UAPs, ghosts, night vision, and all sorts of things beyond that. Any final words, Andy and Ben?
I think we've covered everything. I can't think of anything off the top of my head right now. But just want to say thank you to Andy T for being a really interesting guest. We've spoken many times before, and it's good to talk to you again.
And
Oh, thank
I'd
you.
just say that all the things that raise absolutely fascinating. Hopefully, Andy T will write many more different books. And actually, Andy T, I'm going to ask you to stay on a little bit, because I'm actually in the middle of dealing with somebody who's got some quite freaky UFO stuff going on. So it might be good to see if you can kind of get to the bottom of it's bizarre, but we'll talk about that off camera and see where that goes.
Right. Okay, thanks for joining us on the Paranormal Peep Show. Join us again next month. We are Andy, Neil, Ben, and Andy again on the Paranormal Peep Show on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Good night.